This defendant, who lived around the block from this residence, drove by on a motorcycle. It's actually a three-wheel motorcycle. It's called a Can-Am, and he was driving around the neighborhood at a very high rate of speed. They will testify. Had a child on the Can-Am with him. Drove by the residence where they're all outside, and they objected to the speed at which he was going. One of them cursed at him, told him to slow down. He went around the cul-de-sac, came back in front of him. He slowed down, cursed back at him, and then proceeded to speed off, again with this very small child on this vehicle.
Mr. Brown, he has a 7-year-old son in the back. He's testing out the Can-Am, had done some work on it. They go to the cross street, come down in the cul-de-sac. He's riding with his 7-year-old son, turns around in the cul-de-sac, and as he proceeds to go out, then one of the Carmoegas, one of them, whether it be Senior or whether it Pedro, says, "Hey man, slow the down. Don't come riding through here that fast," and actually proceeds to run out in the street and block Mr. Brown where he has to hit the brakes on the Can-Am, almost flying or throwing his 7-year-old off the back seat. And then some words are exchanged. Mr. Brown simply say, "Look, get out of the way," goes around into his cul-de-sac, drops his 7-year-old son off, and tells his wife, "I'm gonna keep riding. You know, there's still some work I need to do on the Can-Am. I'm test driving, whatever," because his trade, by nature, he's a mechanic.
Michael Carmoega Sr., who is in his early 40s, you'll hear his testimony. He will testify that he wanted to get this individual's tag number. He was concerned about the safety of this child because of the speed at which the defendant was driving, that he perceived him to be driving in a reckless manner. So he got in his vehicle and followed him. The defendant had gone up the street, and I'll have some visual aids, some maps to show you during the course of the trial, so we'll be able to kind of place all these things. I know it's a little hard to follow just the description, but the defendant had turned left at the end of the street, so he followed in the direction he'd seen him gone. And his son, Michael Carmoega Jr., who's in his early 20s, along with Pedro, or PJ, who is Michael Carmoega Sr.'s brother, Michael Carmoega Jr.'s uncle. Jr. and Pedro decided they were going to follow after him. They were concerned about Carmoega Sr. following the defendant by himself. They didn't know something could go wrong, so they got in the car to follow after him.
Well, lo and behold, I guess we expect the evidence to show the Carmoegas weren't satisfied with telling Mr. Brown, "Slow." The evidence will show they made the conscious decision to get in their vehicles, 3 of them, not to get a tag number, but to confront Mr. Brown about what just had happened.
Michael Carmoega Jr. will testify that he was driving his white pickup truck, and PJ was in the passenger side. And that as he drove around the block and went up the street, the defendant was on his Can-Am, his motorcycle, kind of parked in the lane where he was oncoming, such that it caused him to have to stop the vehicle.
So they made the conscious decision, the evidence will be presented, that they get in their vehicles. They drive around to that intersection where Mr. Brown is riding and cut him off, so he cannot proceed and drive his vehicle.
And the defendant got off the Can-Am. He had something in his hand. Pedro was concerned, PJ was concerned about what was about to happen, so he got out of the vehicle, went around the front, put himself between the defendant and Michael Carmoega Jr. because the defendant had begun to advance on his nephew. Michael Carmoega Sr., about this time, is pulling out from another direction, they'll testify, and he's able to observe what happens next.
That then the Carmoegas, all three of them, got out of their vehicles. The alleged victim in this case got out of his vehicle, confronts Mr. Brown, wanting to fight. So Mr. Brown sees that three individuals, three grown men, get out of their vehicles. He's by himself. And he does, we expect evidence to show any reasonable person would do, he gets into a position to defend himself. And for his sake, he did have a knife on his person.
The defendant, who had a knife in his hand, used it to attack PJ. He cut him a couple of times. There was a cut in his throat. As you'll see, there's a cut on his chest. Ultimately, there's also a cut on his arm. And what they said happened next was that the defendant got back on his motorcycle and proceeded to drive forward so that he could turn around. PJ grabbed onto the motorcycle, and the defendant dragged him down the street a few feet. They're not entirely certain how far, but it's a short distance. And that during the course of that, he struck Michael Jr. with the motorcycle. Michael Jr. had gotten out of the vehicle by this point, struck him with the motorcycle, and then Pedro fell off, lost his grip and fell off. The defendant turned around and drove off. That was the last that they saw of him.
And he has the knife, and he's like, you all get back. Don't approach me. But he gets off the bike abruptly, that has to take a stance of defense, but the Can-Am, some people call him a trike, some people call him a bike, starts to roll because Mr. Brown, when he hops off of it, it's in neutral. And when the bike starts to roll, he tries to grab it, and at that time, he gets hit on the side of his head, and those two other individuals began to beat him up. And we expect the evidence to show that at that point, when they're beating on him, the alleged victim in the case, as you'll see the picture of the bike, there's a little handle on the back behind the passenger, the rider's seat, where Mr. Carmoega has grabbed the back of that bike, trying to hold Mr. Brown, trying to keep that bike from rolling and hold Mr. Brown there in position so the other two individuals can continue attacking him. And at that point, the evidence will show Mr. Brown, trying to get away from these individuals, takes the knife. And then while Mr. Carmoega is holding on, that's when Mr. Carmoega is hit in the throat. And we also expect the evidence to show that you will see a very distinct cut on Mr. Carmoega's arm, that where medical personnel trying to save Mr. Carmoega did stitch it up because it was bleeding, where he was holding on to that bike, where Mr. Brown tried to get away, made that slashing, but also slashed his arm to make Mr. Carmoega let go of the bike, and so he could get away. And we expect the evidence to show that you'll see the blood stains where the initial event happened, and there's a travel of some blood stains where Mr. Brown was trying to get away, and where unfortunately Mr. Carmoega was